Again, my name is Joy J. I am a very, very grateful recovered compulsive eater, and God has removed the obsession for me to want to control my body, control my eating, the loss of control that I used to experience when I would compulsively eat since December 3rd of 2017. And so I just celebrated 8 years, a couple weeks ago. And so I am going to share some of my story, and then we'll do a few minutes of questions at the end. But I'm going to share about what it was like living in the illness, what happened to bring me to a 12-step program, that would remove this obsession, what my life is like now that I'm recovered and working the steps and living in the solution. So when I always think back to the beginning of my story and how that relates to step one. So if we look at, I'm using the AA Big Book now in Chronic Compulsive Eaters Anonymous. The AA Big Book is, at the moment, the only approved literature that we have for our fellowship. And I'm working out of a fourth edition, but I'm going to flip to page 59, and that's where all the steps are listed. So if we look at step one, and I just kind of like to, see how step one presented in me kind of throughout my story, but it says we were powerless over compulsive eating, that our lives had become unmanageable. And so step one kind of gets broken down into these two parts, where the first part is we admitted we were powerless over compulsive eating. And so that comes down to the body aspect. And within step one, there's two parts of step one that comes down to the mind and body. The first part is that I'm powerless over my compulsive eating, which is my body, which is once I take that first bite, there's a loss of control that happens for me, in that I can't tell you when I'm going to stop. Now, the second part of step one is the unmanageability, and that basically has to do how I'm powerless over my mind. And that I have this mind that will always take me back to that first compulsive bite, even though I don't want to. So my life is unmanageable, not because of the consequences of my compulsive eating. My life is unmanageable because I can't stop, even though I want to. And that is kind of an important part of step one, is that I do need to have tried to have stopped, because I can't see that unmanageability unless I've tried to stop and I can't. So it's like I have this broken mind that keeps taking me back to the very thing that is hurting me. So when I think back to what it was like in the illness, and it wasn't always about the food. It's not like, wow, everything. It was like this, everything made me a compulsive eater. But what I do know presents very well through my story is that the selfishness that I had was really apparent early on. And that one of the things that we learn as we start the steps is that, and they start talking about this piece in step three, they start talking about how really my real problem isn't my compulsive eating. My real problem is my selfishness, and that I compulsively eat to deal with my selfishness. That's how I dealt with life. So it was actually, I know for a long time I was like, oh my gosh, I'm this awful compulsive eater. It's this horrible thing and blah. And it was at times, but it was actually saving me in a sense at myself, saving me from myself, and that I had a way to deal with my selfishness, and that I got ease and comfort from obsessing about diets and losing control of my food and thinking about my food all the time and waking up in the morning, and everything was just about, how can I get skinny? And how can I be like these other people that are skinny because they apparently have it together and I don't have it together? And so when I was a kid, I was always an awkward child, and I just had, this voice in the back of my head that was always telling me that I was a loser. And I think sometimes we think maybe those types of things are a phase, and maybe they are a phase in some people, but for me, that was something that never disappeared. And even in recovery, that's something that when it might come back from time to time, that voice, and it comes down to how spiritually fit am I staying. And so, and some things like where I can remember really vividly what the selfishness might have looked like for me as a kid or even an adolescent was I was very, very uncomfortable in social situations. I didn't know how to comfort people. I was really I remember we had a friend in the hospital at one time, and we went there to see them, and it was just a super uncomfortable situation. And I remember there were people there wanting to comfort this person and see how they could help. And for me it was like, how can I get out of this situation as quickly as I can? And just really, really being worried all the time at what other people thought of me, and thinking that, well, if I'm skinny, everything will be fine. And I've always been, and this hasn't even changed about me, but I just like food. I remember as a kid, like I always liked food. Um, and I would like during the summer, I would be in and out of the fridge, like in and out, in and out, in and out of the fridge. And my mom would like be threatening. She's like, I'm gonna chain that fridge shut. And I think she actually might have at one point. But she would like come home from the store and I'd be like looking through the cabinets, like, what did she get? What did she get at the store? And so there was even early on like this kind of just like this overthinking about food. It was just kind of there as a crutch, but a lot of people use food as a crutch and they're not compulsive eaters. But at some time along the way, and I kind of more vividly remember it, I started losing control. That first part of step one, where I'm powerless over my compulsive eating, I started to lose. Once I would start compulsively eating, there was a loss of control that happened. Now, for me, and not everybody is like this, but it looked like binging for me. And when I was an adolescent, it actually looked like purging as well. But that's not always what it looked like for me. It wasn't always purging. So, and I just had this idea all the time that, if I could just lose a few more pounds, like people will like me. And if I just look like the girl, we used to have like I can't even remember the name of the teen magazines. That's what everybody would look at back in the 90s. And it'd be like if I could just like look like the girls. They used to have like those Delia's catalogs, and I used to like look in those and be like, if I could just have this outfit and I could just be like this girl, then everything would be okay. And and if I could just have these friends. And so that's when really I started to really be overly conscious too of like boys and wanting to get a boyfriend, and like there was a lot of pressure on me. And so for some reason, when I found my brain for some reason, and Joe and Charlie actually talk about this in their big book series, and I'm forgetting now which chapter they're covering, but they talk about how for some reason what happens is that for us it's like something bad happens and we compulsively eat and we feel better, and it's like our brain stores it away and it like remembers, hey, that made me feel better. And so what would happen is as time goes on and I get uncomfortable situations, my brain would say compulsively eat because you felt better that time. And that always resonated so much with me that it was like it was my mind and my body trying to save me from uncomfortable situations. And so when I go through high school and I had a really hard time up into high school, but I kind of started running around with the wrong crowd in high school. And I finally just like really felt good about myself because I had a car and like I was I kind of felt like, when Bill talks about in a story, like I had arrived, it was like, oh, like this is what it's like to have friends. Of course, it was like the wrong kind of friends and it was the wrong kind of situation. And I did a lot of outside issues and a lot of, honestly, I think back to that time in my life and I'm not even quite sure how I'm alive because I did a lot of dumb, bad things. And but what was always there in the background was kind of this obsession that I had around my food. And there were times that it was okay and it was manageable, especially through my teenage years and my 20s. It really started to become apparent that I was exhibiting the second part of step one within my 20s, the unmanageability part where I couldn't stop. And so after, and the thing too about all these outside issues I used to do, I could stop. Then I would do those things, and the next day I would feel awful, and I would be like, I finally just got to a point where I was like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like the way that I feel. I don't like feeling sick, and I was able to just stop. Now with my compulsive eating, I was never able. I was able to stop for a time, but I could never stay stopped. And so as I go through my 20s, and the other thing was, is was just, I was really, after I got out of high school, kind of turned into, I was really, really career obsessed and I had this very demanding job. And I actually would push myself really hard, like saying, oh my gosh, you have to be skinny for your job. And the thing was, too, is like I was never really overweight. I was very, very active as a child, as a teen. Even the job that I had, I was very, very active in. But there was like just this always this idea that, whoa, it could always be better. You could always be thinner, and then everything would be better. And then I would get thinner, and I would lose the weight, and everything wasn't better. It now the obsession was like, oh my gosh, how do I hang on to this? How do I hang on to all these compliments that I'm getting and people saying like how good I look and my jeans and how do I hang on to that? So it's fine, when you're in your 20s and you have a lot of energy. And I was just doing my, working really hard, really going kind of up and down with this obsession with my food. And I get diagnosed with mental health problems, which I think is really common for a lot of us. And I really thought that that was the answer was, oh, I have mental health problems and now I just need to start medications and then I'll be fine. And I was fine for a little while after starting them. I wasn't suicidal anymore, but that underlying fear of that unhappiness and that voice in the back of my head that was telling me that I was a loser, that never went away. It was still there. And it was like I was always chasing happiness. I was like, you know what, if I meet this career goal, if I'm in this type of relationship, if I have this kind of car, if I have this kind of body, like then everything will be okay and I'll be happy. But I just wasn't. I just wasn't happy because I would get those things and then it was like, then I was just obsessed with the next thing. And so I really spend my all of my 20s and my early 30s basically using a a bunch of external things to try to fix an inside problem. And what the 12-step program does is produces a psychic change that's going to change my perspective around my eating. And that's really what I was doing when I was out there trying all these different methods to fix me was I was trying to produce a psychic change. I was trying to produce something that would make me feel whole and happy, but I was going about it in the wrong way. So some of the things that I tried were, of course, the diets and just really just lots of diets. If you think of any dieting trend through the 90s, through the 2000s, I probably tried it. And I went to, I had the gym memberships, the personal trainers, and that's the other thing is like I would binge, and then I would kind of get a rough estimate in my head of how many calories that was, and then I would like try to go to the gym and like work off that many calories. And I mean, which is I don't even know that that's possible. But and I was the other thing is I was just spending ridiculous amounts of money on all these things. I was putting myself into debt, trying to, try to sort through all these things. I tried psychics, I tried health supplements, I tried going to church, and none of these things are bad things. It was just that I was trying to produce something inside me that I couldn't produce. That later on I found out that God had to produce that. And so my life really starts spiraling out of control and kind of going back to step one, where the first part of step one talks about the loss of control, that once I start compulsively eating, it's like I can't tell you when I'm going to stop. And that was getting harder and harder to control. And I was exhibiting signs of the powerlessness around my mind, where I was actually trying to stop this behavior and I couldn't stop it. It was, I would say, okay, I'm not going to obsess about my food. I'm not going to do a diet this time. I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm just going to eat like a normal person. And I could never stick to that resolve. And so when I came into program, this would have been probably sometime early 2017. I kind of came in through a different fellowship, and I got a sponsor in that fellowship, and they told me I would tell them about my eating problems. This was not a compulsive eating fellowship, it was separate. And they were like, you need to get help. Like, they were like, I cannot help you because this is a major, major issue that you have going on with that you're disordered eating. And so they referred me to go try another fellowship that's for compulsive eating. And so I did that. And it really was kind of eye-opening because I knew I had a problem with this, but I thought it was something that I could completely manage on my own. But what I learned was when I came to some of those meetings was I was like, oh my gosh, like, A, there's other people that do this. And B, like I'm like, I need this spiritual solution. Now, and it wasn't just about how out of control my food is. Like if I flip to page, really what it came down for me was this stuff on page 52 where it talks about the bedevilments. So it wasn't just that my eating was out of control. It was like my whole life was out of control. And it says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Oh my gosh. I mean, that was me to a T. Talks about we couldn't make a living. I was struggling in my job at this point. I was struggling to show up for work. I was having panic attacks. And it was just like everything, my relationships were falling apart. With my relationship was falling apart with my husband, with those around me. And so, sometimes people come to 12 step or to CCEA and they're like, well, I just need to lose a few pounds. And our job as sponsors is to help people see, do you need to have a spiritual experience to remove this obsession you have around your food? Because if you just want to come here and just lose a few pounds, I know that's not why I came. I came because of this page 52 stuff, because I couldn't live anymore. I had a living problem. I didn't really have yes, I had a food problem too, an obsession around my compulsive eating, but I could not live anymore. And I got really, really lucky when I came into program, and that initially, I got hooked up with somebody that used the big book. Now at the time I didn't really care. I didn't know anything about the big book. I just went to a speaker meeting. It was over the phone, and there was just a lady sharing her story, just like this meeting. But she talked about neutrality. She talked about that she could go places and not worry about her food. Like I couldn't go anywhere because I was like, oh my gosh, like what if there's sugar there? Like what if like how can I just have a piece of cake? How can I go to a wedding and like just eat the food like an, like all these insane thinking that at the time I didn't think it was insane, but it is. But she talked about how she could go places and just be neutral, and that she woke up in the morning and she didn't like just think about her food all day long. And I was so blown away by this woman because I'd never heard anything like that. What kind of the messaging that I'd heard prior to this was basically like, you have to have your plan of eating, you have to have your trigger foods, and there's nothing wrong with those things. I think there's lots of people that works for, and I think that's fantastic. But at where I was at, it really sounded like a death sentence because I didn't want to control and manage my food anymore. I just wanted to wake up in the morning and not think about it. I wanted to be sane and normal and neutral. And so when this lady talked about this, I was totally blown away. She left her name as a sponsor, and I called her and I was like, I don't know what you do. I was so new. Oh, my life was such a mess back then. Um, I'm like, I don't care what you do, but what you were talking about, the neutrality you were talking about, and that you don't have to worry about it anymore. I was like, that's what I want. And I'm like, will you help me? And she asked me a couple questions, and I'll just flip to that real quick. On page 44, there's a couple qualifying questions that help us um, basically diagnose ourselves. And it basically is summing up step one with a couple questions. It says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit compulsively eating entirely, so that's the unmanageability part of step one. Or if when compulsively eating, you have little control over the amount you take, that's that first part of step one, we're powerless over our compulsive eating, our bodies, then you're probably a chronic compulsive eater. And it's very simple. And so she basically, had me read the book, and she, like I said, she qualified me, and she asked me if I was ready to be done. Was I ready to be done thinking that like eating a certain way was going to fix me? Was I ready to be done basically playing God in my life? And I said I was, and she just happened to use the AA Big Book. I wasn't hung up on what she did, but she was recovered and she was free and neutral, and I just did what she did. And she was like, we're going to use this book and we're going to go through the steps. And that's what we did. And this was a very crazy time in my life at this point. I just found out I was pregnant with my first child, and we went through the steps quickly, but she was just asking me to do stuff that I didn't want to do. I didn't want a 10 step. We got to step 10. I remembered I had made some amends, but this 10 step stuff, I remember I was on the road for work, and I was just totally nuts about work. Like it just everybody drove me nuts at work. And I remember I was like, hey, I have this stuff coming up, but I'm too busy. I'm too busy to 10 step. And she was like, if you're not going to follow directions, it's just better that you just don't do this. And so she basically let me go. And this would have been around the summer of 2017. And honestly, it was really the kindest thing that anyone has ever done because I needed to be let go. I had some other things going on too in my life at the time that I really wasn't ready to get honest about. And I think that was playing into this also, and that it's like, okay, God, I'll give you my compulsive eating, but I'm not going to give you this other thing. And that was kind of playing into some of this. So basically, what it comes down to is when somebody is bulking, like I was, I didn't want to do a 10 step because, doing that's hard and helping others is hard. So the only way that I get to to take away selfishness is that I have to do unselfish acts. So every time I 10 step, I have to, because I'm being selfish, I have to find a way to not be selfish. And I didn't want to do that. And so, what I'm basically saying in my actions when I don't want to do that is that I'm not convinced that I need to be here. And so I got let go. I basically relapsed for about 4 months and I wasn't compulsively eating, but I was on my way. I was getting to that place where it was like I couldn't stand anybody at my job. I didn't want to go to work. I was kind of starting to have panic attacks again. By this point, I'm at the end of the 4 months. I'm right around 6 months pregnant, and I could see what was happening and where it was going. And I was on my way to my next compulsive bite. And at this point, it scared me. It scared me because I had a child growing inside me and I was so afraid. I'm like, what if I start compulsively eating and I'm pregnant? Like, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that to my baby. And it scared me enough that I was like, okay, like my sponsor was right. Like, I need to call her back. And so I called her. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you were right. Like, please take me back." And she referred me on to someone else only because I had this other outside issue thing going on, and she wanted me to get a sponsor that had experience in that too, because it was kind of a big thing for me at the time. And so, but I got hooked up with a sponsor that I still have today, and this would have been, like I said, early December 2017, so over 8 years ago. And this time I didn't balk. Like, and we went back through the steps the same way out of the big book. We went quickly through the book and I just did it. And I didn't even know why I was doing it. It was just like, it was really like my sponsor would say jump and I said how high. Like there was no, like I was so defeated at this point. And I could see that I just needed to really just shut up and do what I was supposed to do, even though I didn't understand it. And what I know now is that God kind of meets us where we're at, and that if I'm trying, even if I don't understand everything perfectly, if I'm trying, that I'm going to get it as long as I'm making the best effort that I can. And so what I noticed started happening this time around was that, she said, you need to show up to home group. You need to be, you need to, she was going to hold me accountable to show up to home group. And I needed to get a service commitment. I got a service commitment. I think I started, leading a meeting. And she said, and by this point, I'd gone through the steps. The psychic change had started to happen and that my perspective around my eating was changing. And the book says at that point, when that happens, is that that's when we start helping people. It says we try to carry this message. It doesn't mean we're successful. We try. But she told me, she's like, okay, now you're gonna, announce as a sponsor at the end of meetings and you're gonna try to find people to help and to take through the steps. And I didn't want to do it, but I did it again because I was like, well, there's nothing else out there for me. I've tried everything. Okay, sure, I'll try to sponsor people. And I was on a mission. I remember my sponsor really drove home to me. She was like, find someone to take through the steps, find someone to take through the steps. And so like, I remember I'd be at work on my lunch break. I'd be on phone meetings and I'd be like, I hear there was a newcomer and I'd like call that newcomer like right after the meeting. And eventually what started happening was that people started wanting me to take them through the steps. And I took a lot of, I remember in those early days, I took on a lot of people at once, which is not necessarily how I do it now. But I know I was so sick in those early days that it just saved me. I remember I had like a sponsorship commitment like almost every day. And it saved my butt because my life was falling apart. I remember at the time I was kind of like my husband and I were not living together. I was pregnant. it was really, my husband and I sometimes will talk about those days, and they were insane days. And sometimes I look back on it now and I forget how crazy it was. And that's why it's so important that we sponsor, is because I need to hold newcomers close to me and take them through the work, because without doing that, I forget what it's like. And so I was 3 months, about 3 months recovered, and I had a baby in recovery. So I was sponsoring people at this point. And I remember I was in the hospital, and I was like on our home group, my home group meeting is a phone meeting. And I was like on that meeting in the hospital, and not because I had to be, because I needed to be, because like I was so, it was a new mom and I was freaked out. And it was just like, there are so many moments when God showed up in my life. And so, getting into the part of the story, what it's like now that I'm recovered, it's I get to show up. And that first year of recovery was really, really hard, but I just made the effort to do it. And what I noticed started happening, especially probably even a couple weeks into having gone through the steps and my having to start having the psychic change, was I started realizing that I'm not thinking about my food anymore. And what I noticed was the more that I threw myself into the work, the more I stopped worrying about what my body looked like and what my eating was. And this isn't a thing where it's like, oh, I just get to be happy, like, being fat or whatever and eating different types of food. What really happened later on for me was that God kind of showed me later in recovery, probably at least a couple years in, that I needed to eat a certain way in order for me to do God's work well. And that kind of in the beginning, I was so disillusioned around food, because my whole life I had never really known how to eat for nourishment, that I just kind of ate whatever. I wasn't compulsively eating, but I wasn't eating well, and I wasn't eating well for my body. And but so eventually God did kind of say, "Hey, it's going to be better if you kind of, don't eat certain things." And so, and then I took that guy, and I remember I had this doctor tell me, she's like, you need to stop eating this and this. And I was like, no, 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 I can't do that. Like I have I'm recovered from an eating disorder. Like I can't just not eat those foods. And I remember I went to my sponsor about it, and she's like, when you're walking with God, you can do anything. And so God was showing me, it wasn't my idea. It wasn't my bright idea to say, oh, I need to not eat these things. It was God kind of showing me. And so now I get to being recovered. I have a really great group of ladies that I get to sponsor, and I'm really, really grateful for them. And they help me tremendously. And I get to be a mom. I've got two little boys, and I have a husband. My husband and I, our relationship was basically restored because of this program. And I'm just, the amends that I've been able to make too was a really big part of that part of my story. And that, I got to try to make things. There was a lot of bad stuff that I did that I felt justified in doing. And the freedom that I felt in going to those people and trying to see if I could make those things right, that was really where a lot of the closeness to God came. And I know a lot of people, step 9 is hard. And I'm not saying it's not hard. It takes tremendous courage to do some of these amends. But for me, a lot of the closeness that I got to my creator and to this power was through step 9. Because that wasn't me doing those amends, that was God. And so even today, it's not like my life is perfect. My life is not perfect. And sometimes I think what happens is, and what I've noticed kind of being a little bit later in recovery, is that the ego presents itself in a little way. And I kind of picked this passage. Um, it's part of page 85, and this has kind of been real relevant to me lately. Oh, there it is. Um, it says, it is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for compulsive eating is a subtle foe. We are not cured of compulsive eating. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. And so I'm guilty of really of resting on my laurels at times, kind of later in recovery. And the ego kind of sneaks up on me. And kind of what I'm learning is that every bad decision I've ever made, pretty much in my life and even in recovery included, is that my problems start because of loss of consciousness. As soon as I start making decisions, things start going very badly in my life. And that it's easy for me to be like, well, I don't even think about my food anymore. It's just not something that's on my radar. I have complete neutrality. And so sometimes it's easy when we get in that place for a long period of time to be like, you kind of start testing the waters a little bit and seeing, well, how much do I have to do in order to maintain this? And so I'm not perfect. And I've noticed that when I don't spend enough time with God, it's really, really easy for me to have the ego slip back in. And so I have to be on my guard. And I've noticed too that the more time that I spend with God, the smoother things go. So, and this is something I tell like the people I sponsor, is that, and it, for me, if it's like, if I'm going to tell a protege something, I better be doing it too. And so it comes down to how much time have I spent with God and who have I helped? If I'm having things coming up, and usually it's a lot of fear. That's a big defect for me. I've always been a really, really fear-based person. And so when I'm not spending enough time with God and I'm not helping people, I am not right, even later in recovery. And it's just something I've come to accept, is really that fear is something I have to be comfortable with, and my ego, because I am, for some reason, God has chosen me to do a lot of work for Him. And I wish I could say that I'm out there like Mother Teresa and I'm just doing all this work and I love helping people. And I do love helping people, especially probably after that first year of recovery. I really enjoy watching people recover. But for me to get off my butt and do things, I have to be made extremely uncomfortable. And that's just kind of who I am and where I'm at in my recovery. And so God just kind of keeps throwing things at me, and I just keep trying to kind of do the next right thing and putting the next foot forward. And I just feel really, really blessed that I have a solution now, where before it was compulsive eating, or I don't know. I don't even know if I'd be alive at this point without the program, because of the severe mental health problems that I was having throughout my life. So I feel really grateful for all of you. I feel grateful that I get to do service, that I get to help others, that I have a solution, because there's so many people out there that will never get it. And so being someone that was chosen to get it, that comes with a deep responsibility. So I have to keep carrying the message. You guys can call or text me anytime. I'm a recovered sponsor. My number is 602-694-1012. I think Kat, we just opened it up, right, Kat?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And if it's okay, I'll go ahead and get us kicked off. Yeah, just a comment first, just that I think it is important to note that I think there's a thought that the longer you're in program, that the easier it's going to get because you're going to get the hang of things, but actually sometimes feels like the opposite. So I was wondering if you could maybe share a little bit. You said, kind of that importance of conscious contact with a higher power. Maybe just what does that look like for you? So like that there's such a great need for it, especially maybe with the busy lifestyle with having kids and things like that. How do you incorporate time for God, or what helps you the most when it comes to that?
Um, I just ask God to help me with it. And because sometimes I get into this place where it's like I expect it to always look a certain way. And anytime I'm having an expectation, I'm going to set myself up for a resentment. And there's certain times when it's like it's a really, it works out well if I can wake up really early before my kids get up to spend time with God. Now, there's times when I just physically can't do that, whether a kid's not sleeping well or I have some health problems and I have to sleep. Maybe it's something where it's like, hey, we're not going to have a busy morning and I'm going to make the time to spend with God. So it's kind of being flexible too. And it's not that it doesn't get easier in program, it does get easier. The more that I'm relying on God, the easier it gets. But it is easy sometimes to drift back into ego. And it's I heard a speaker share this once where it was like when we come to program, we agree that we're going to take the clown suit off, but we don't throw the clown suit away. Like we just hang it up in the closet and then we wear it around every once in a while. And that's definitely been my experience is that I need to, sometimes I do dumb stuff in recovery and I take my will back and it always goes very badly. And so I have to learn, I learn through those experiences that I'm not perfect. And it really just kind of reestablishes, hey, I've got to up my game. What am I not doing? And it always comes down to I'm not spending enough time with God and I'm not helping enough people. It always comes back to that for me.
Thanks so much. That makes sense.
Hey Joy, this is Marie. Um,
Hey,
hey, I was wondering with kind of some of the outside issues that you named, how you get clarity about like what still needs to be addressed as an outside issue versus like what can be addressed through program and especially when it comes to like actually seeing providers like doctors and stuff.
um, I think God can take care of anything when we let him. And because I had some issues with even in recovery, I had other things that have popped up. I think if if I would have recognized that right in the beginning and asked God to work on this obsession for me, I think I wouldn't have taken it as far as I did. And that everything needs to be God guided. And I remember when I think back to these issues I was having, and I remember I didn't really talk to my sponsor about this stuff. And so, and I was really reacting a lot from fear. And so, and it comes down to, well, do I need another fellowship? In the case, I did kind of need to go back through the steps for this other thing because it got to a point where I was very powerless over it, and I had a hard time seeing my thinking. That might not be the case for everything. Piling on fellowships can be. There's only so much we can do. Like for me, I'm active in two fellowships mainly and it comes down to is am I asking God to take this thing? And because it does say at the beginning of the book that the steps are going to solve all my problems. Now if I have a problem come up, I'm like, wow, am I really powerless over this? Like, am I wanting to stop whatever this thing is and I can't stop? Then yeah, maybe I need to talk to somebody that has experience with that. But yeah, it's always been I need to go back to my sponsor. I need to talk about this. I don't get to compartmentalize my recovery and that there's only certain things I'm going to give to God and other things I'm not. I need to be discussing. everything with my sponsor and let her help me get back on the path. Not that she's God, but I'm not right with God on certain things, and her job is to put me back on the path with God. So I just need to be kept honest. And that's hard sometimes. A lot of times that's hard but it's crucial that we are honest. So I don't know if that answers that, but thank you.
Yeah, really helpful. Thanks, Troy.
Joy, this is Marcia C.
Yeah, hi Marcia.
Hi. Listen, I enjoyed hearing your talk. You described so much clearer um, some things that I have experienced spiritually, especially, that the way you described them and how God came through was very helpful. And I identified with a lot of that. And that's something that I had to learn was not to decide what it's going to be like when God gets through to me.
Right.
You have to be open. You can't decide what's good and what's bad and right off the bat or whatever. Just be ready for after prayer, asking God to come to you for this situation or that or whatever. And so I love hearing about your journey, and I appreciate how much you have shared in honesty, which is very important in our recovery. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Maureen, you can go ahead.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Joy. I just wanted to let you know how much I was blessed by hearing your story. I hear you on the meetings, and I always learn a lot, from what you share. But it just makes it even more personal now, having watched you and share your story, and it was just really great. Thank you so much. I wanted to comment on just one specific thing. I love how the when you shared how if something's not going right or there's a problem, you've learned. Your message was so simple that I'm not spending enough time with God, and or I'm not helping enough people. I love how that answer um, encompasses so much, but yet it's so simple. And I tend to overcomplicate everything, um, and I just really liked the simpleness and yet how powerful it was too. So thank you so very much. I was just really blessed by your share today. I'll pass.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Maureen, and thanks for all the service that you do. I know you're really active. And yeah, something I remember that I would hear Cliff Bishop say in some of the recordings that I would hear him talk about, but he would when he would have these proteges come to him and they were just so distressed, he would be like, when was the last time, you read page, I think it was like page 84 through 164. And he would tell him like the answer's somewhere in there. So why don't you go do that? And it was just the way that he would lay out things. It was just so simple. And sometimes I think it's easy for us to want to be like try to manage our proteges and be like, well, you got to do that, you do this. And it's like the answer is really simple. It's like either you're doing what's written here and the answer is right here in the book, or you're not doing it. So I just love the simplicity of the program. So
Hi, thanks so much for sharing, Joy. I was really struck in your story about, like, most recently how connected to God you are and how everything just comes back to, like, am I spending enough time with God? Am I asking God? Like, just that your honesty around that. And I wondered, um, was there a particular part in your journey when that changed, or where that's like what got you into that particular part where you're like, hang on, I just need to be taking all of this to God all the time? Or was there particular things or things that helped you that helped that to just really click?
Yeah, it was basically when the book talks about in recovery, I had to get humbled again. I had to get beaten in a state of reasonableness. So I started to have a lot of worries around a health problem that I was having and a lot of obsession over how to fix it. And I took my will back and I had to get humbled by the experience of me taking back my will and it not working and getting completely defeated by it. And that brought me back to this place where it was like, why I'm not giving this to God and it's ruining my life. And I remember at one point I was starting to have things come up that like even not, I wasn't obsessing over food, but for some reason I was thinking about it and I started having some issues in my relationship that I hadn't had in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember speaking to my sponsor about it, and she was like, you don't get to keep your neutrality that you have in these areas if you're going to just try to take back your will in this other area. You have to give all
Mm-hmm.
of it up. And so I basically and then it was like my eyes opened up and I was like, you know what? I've been playing God with this
Mm-hmm.
health stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got beaten. I got beaten down. And then it was like, oh, I can't, I had to learn it. It's like with kids, like they've got to learn everything the hard way, unfortunately. And that was the same with me. It wasn't enough that my sponsor just said, don't do this. It was like I had to go through the bad stuff in order to be like, oh, this is why I have to give everything to God, is because things start to go very badly when I don't. So,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you for your service. I'm dialing in from uh, Scotland late at night, and I'm awful glad that I did to hear what you had to share. Thank you so much.
yeah, thanks, Laura.